Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about the Phoenix Suns. Last night they faced off against the Denver Nuggets in a really fun game, just another example of how these West Coast late night TNT matchups always seem to deliver on national television. It's happened so many times this season, and this one did so again, as both a rematch of last year's playoff series between these two teams, and potentially a playoff preview, because right now if the season ended today, the Nuggets would be the 3 seed, the Suns would be the 6, so this would be a matchup in the first round, one that would be really fun, full of star power, and has a bunch of storylines going into it. Of course, like I said, these two teams played last year. The Nuggets are now going to be looking to repeat in the Western Conference, as well as the NBA as a whole as NBA champions, while the Phoenix Suns are looking to finally get over the hump, this time with a big three of Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, and Bradley Beal. This game delivered on a lot of the hype. It was really fun all throughout. The Nuggets started off great with Jamal Murray going crazy in the first quarter. They built up a little bit of lead heading into the second, but by the 9:26 mark in the third quarter, the Suns had built up a massive 22-point lead on Denver in Denver in a game where they didn't have Devin Booker, who's arguably their best player. Kevin Durant was cooking out there. Jusuf Nurkic did a really solid job on Nikola Jokic defensively. Did get in a bit of a foul trouble situation, but overall really held his own. Fantastic stuff from him. He's been fantastic as of late as a whole, especially on the boards. I would know he grabbed 30 rebounds against my Thunder. Grayson Allen could not miss from 3. He started off 8 for 8 in this game, and as a team, they were playing fantastic defense. So with all this building up, again, a 22-point third quarter lead, it seemed like a statement win may be coming for Phoenix. They did lose a little bit of steam towards the end of the third quarter. The lead was only 9 heading into the fourth, but they battled back and forth with that lead heading into the 3:54 mark in that fourth quarter, where the lead was still at this point 9 points. Then in typical 2024 Suns fashion, they completely collapsed. They immediately gave up a 12-0 run to Denver, which was capped off by a Jamal Murray bucket that gave Denver a 3-point lead with 46 seconds left to go. Over that same stretch, Phoenix had a turnover and shot 0 for 4 with Jusuf Nurkic fouling out in the process and giving Jokic some critical free throws. It was a disastrous stretch, one that we've seen from the Phoenix Suns a lot this year, and it felt like it might lose them what otherwise was going to be a statement win of a game. Lucky for them, they do have Kevin Durant, who had a huge step back 3 with 27 seconds to go to ultimately tie the game and send it to overtime after they got a stop on Denver on the other end, where all of a sudden the Suns just seemingly relearned how to play basketball. They would outscore Denver 15-5 in the overtime period and win by 10 points in what is ultimately a major win for this Phoenix team. They've been really up and down throughout the year. They've got one of the hardest remaining schedules in the entire NBA, and they're in the midst of a really close Western Conference where if you lose a couple of games, you can drop drastically down the standings. So they really need this win. They need all the wins they can get, and being able to come back from that massive fourth quarter collapse is huge for this team going forward. So, shout out to the Phoenix Suns. This video isn't to rag on them. I think they've been a good team overall this season, but it is to highlight that fourth quarter issue that we saw in this game, and that has been prevalent this entire season. I don't think a lot of people realize just how truly bad the Suns have been in fourth quarters this year. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is the worst fourth quarter team in the entire NBA. In fact, they're one of the worst fourth quarter teams in NBA history. It's legitimately insane how bad they are in those final 12 minutes. It's like they just freeze and don't know what sport they're playing, despite having a lot of great talented players on that roster. On the season, the Phoenix Suns have a fourth quarter net rating of -14.8, which is the worst in basketball by a mile. The second worst team in that regard are the Miami Heat, and they have a net rating of -5.9. So the Suns have more than doubled them in the negative in that regard. It's ridiculous how much worse they've been than everyone else. And even with that Heat team, they've been known for struggling in the fourth quarter. One of my best friends, Matt, is a big Heat fan, and every time they go into the fourth quarter with a lead, he's like, okay, here we go. This is the part where they try and blow it. Maybe they end up holding on for a win, but he knows the lead isn't going to last. That team is half as bad as the Phoenix Suns and then some in fourth quarters. To put it into a bit more of a historical context, NBA.com's fourth quarter database goes all the way back to the 1996-1997 season. And from then until now, there have only been 2 teams that have had a worse fourth quarter net rating than the Phoenix Suns. And those 2 squads were the San Antonio Spurs last year, who tanked hard enough to get Victor Wembanyama, and then the Portland Trailblazers the year before, the year where Damian Lillard had that core injury. He ended up playing not that much of the season and was really bad when he did show up. And that team tanked absolutely egregiously in the second half. Neither one of those teams were actively trying to compete the way the Suns are. They have a worse fourth quarter net rating than the Charlotte Bobcats, who are the worst team in NBA history, a worse one than the 10-72 76ers. It's insane how bad they are in the final 12 minutes of games. In fact, while we're on the topic of that 2012 Bobcats team, who again are the worst team in NBA history, they're also tied for the worst net rating in history with a 15.2 in the negative. That net rating for their full season is hardly worse than what the Suns do in fourth quarters, which means the Suns are basically playing like the worst team in NBA history the second that the clock ticks over from third until the fourth quarter. Getting back to just this season, they have easily the worst offense in the fourth, the seventh worst defense, to go with the worst turnover rate by a lot, and the second worst true shooting percentage. It's been abysmal, and if we want to take a look at some specific examples, we can do that as well. And these are examples that are just coming off the top of my head with a couple of minutes of research to verify, so there's a lot more than this. January 7th, they were up 11 on the Grizzlies going into the fourth and got outscored by 17, blowing the lead and losing to a really bad Memphis squad. January 8th, the literal next day, they were facing the Clippers down 10 going into the fourth, made a little bit of a run to start, and it seemed like they might bring it back, and then got eviscerated the rest of the way, getting completely blown out in the process. In late January versus the Pacers, they were up 9 going into the fourth and got outscored by 11 points, a game you might remember because that was the one they lost, despite Devin Booker scoring 62 points, and they only put up 17 against the abysmal Pacers offense in that fourth quarter. Just the other day against, again, my favorite team, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Suns overcame a 24-point deficit and took the lead in the fourth quarter. They were up 98-92 with 8 minutes and 40 seconds to go, up 6. The momentum was shifting all in their favor. And then OKC went on a 26-12 run the rest of the way and ended up winning by 8 points pretty convincingly at the end. Some of these examples were when they had all 3 stars available, some of them included 2. It really hasn't mattered. Injuries have definitely affected them and their ability to build chemistry for these late game moments, but it really hasn't mattered who's been on the court. They've been getting annihilated in fourth quarters regardless of who's out there. It's been a little bit better, I guess, as of late. Over the last 10 games, they're just the 6th worst team in fourth quarters, and over the last 15, they're just the 3rd worst. So it's, I guess, progress, but it's not nearly enough to erase what is one of the craziest storylines that I've been following this entire season. Even in wins, they're falling apart completely and they're having to just barely hold on at the end, which is made even crazier by the fact that they're really good in all other quarters. In the first quarter, they've got the 6th best net rating. In the second quarter, they're a plus 8.6, which is the 4th best in the entire NBA. And in the third quarter, they have a net rating of plus 12.2, which is tied with Oklahoma City for the best in the entire NBA. Every other quarter, they're a top 16, but when you get to the fourth, they're just so historically bad that it leads to them falling apart more often than not. So the question is, why is this happening? Why are they collapsing so badly at the end of games? And I've got some observations and some numbers we can take a look at that kind of explain it if you ask me, but at the same time, I don't think it paints the full picture because none of these things should lead them to being the worst fourth quarter team almost in the history of the sport. Let's talk about the turnovers. They are a big problem for this team against the Thunder. I know specifically a team that is great at forcing turnovers. The Suns had a billion of them, and that was a big reason why the Thunder were able to shift momentum back in their favor in that fourth quarter on that big run they went on. Like I mentioned earlier, they have the worst turnover percentage in the entire league in these fourth quarter moments, and I think that could be the lack of a point guard kind of coming back to bite them. They've got some good ball handlers like Devin Booker, Bradley Beal when he's been healthy. Kevin Durant is a pretty solid playmaker for his position, but they don't have that one true floor general, and that was a big concern for a lot of people coming into the season, especially trading away Chris Paul, who is so big for them in that role over the past few years as a Phoenix Sun. A great example of this is if we go back to that 2022 season where they were the best team in the Western Conference in the regular season. They were easily the best fourth quarter team, and a lot of that was Chris Paul at the end of games, slowing things down, making sure they got good shots, running a lot of clock to sustain the leads that they had. It's stuff that Chris Paul has been doing for years at this point, and now without a guy who has that experience and knows how to do that, I think the Suns are suffering. Like Booker, Beal, Durant have done a fine job of setting up the offense at times. I just don't know if any one of them are capable of being that lead playmaker and decision maker late in games like a lot of other great floor generals are. So that's one thing that's been pretty concerning and stems back to the beginning of the season where people had general concerns about this. The Suns are also really reliant on big time tough shot making from Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Bradley Beal, and those guys are some of the best in the business at doing that, but it's got to be exhausting. I feel like by the time we get to the fourth quarter, they just start missing looks that they typically hit, probably because they're gassed from carrying the offensive load the way that they have to on most nights. There's also just a ton of pressure coming at those guys in the fourth quarter. Teams are saying the supporting cast can beat us. They don't trust the supporting cast to help the stars the way that they probably need them to, and they're just sending a bunch of pressure, help, double teams, whatever they can at Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, whatever stars are actually available on that night, and saying if it's like Royce O'Neal or Grayson Allen or Yusuf Nurkic beating us, okay, we're going to live with that. And the cast just isn't that consistent. This is a team that's really relying on their stars, but I think the over-reliance is leading to just bad decision-making and a lot of iso ball down the stretch of games. This also comes back again to the point guard thing, because I think having a great floor general to set these guys up would make their lives a whole lot easier, but it's just not a luxury that they have. So these are some of the things that I think lead to a lot of these fourth quarter collapses, although, again, it's on a historic level. So I think even part of it may be mental. I wonder if they know about how bad they've been in fourth quarters, like they know the stats, that they're making history in that regard. And I wonder if they get to fourth quarters and think to themselves, okay, we can't collapse this time. We can't collapse and kind of get in their own heads, and then just do end up falling apart like they typically do. Although one thing that's super weird about this whole thing and all these theories, all these observations, is again the fact that they get to overtime and they kind of just figure it out and dominate teams. Maybe it's just, okay, we got over that fourth quarter hump, now in overtime we can kind of just play our ball. Maybe it's a little bit of a rest they get between the quarters. I don't know what it is, but just the fourth quarter in particular, whether it's a mental thing, it's an on-court thing with the lack of a point guard, the over-reliance on these tough shots, on iso ball, something is happening that is leading to the Suns being one of the worst fourth quarter teams in NBA history. And this is something that's concerning to me when we talk about a potential playoff run coming from Phoenix. You can get away with this a lot of nights against some bad teams. You can even have some nights where you get away with it against a great team like Denver. But also in this game, the Nuggets were just bricking a ton of threes that they usually hit. It was an off night from Jokic, which you're basically never going to get in the playoffs. You have to be better than this if you want to compete with the Nuggets in a playoff series or any of those teams towards the top of the Western Conference. They can't be having these collapses the way that they have. Maybe with the amount of experience they have on the roster between Kevin Durant, who's won a couple of finals, Booker, who's been to one, Vogel, who's coached a finals team, Bradley Beal's had some deep playoff runs. Maybe they just figure it out by the time they reach the playoffs. They have some time leading into it. As a healthy team, they can build some chemistry, and maybe it won't end up being a problem. But I don't really know. It's just continued as a problem. It's been so prevalent that nothing makes me feel like it's going to be fixed by the time the playoffs roll around. Honestly, they might just have to hope they're dominant enough in the first three quarters to make sure that any collapse that happens isn't enough to ultimately hand them the L in the end. Honestly, this has been one of the most interesting and random things that I've been following this entire season. It's crazy how continuous it's been, how historically significant it is. We'll have to see what the Phoenix Suns can do. It feels almost reminiscent of last year where the Golden State Warriors were just one of the worst teams in the NBA on the road, but dominant at home, despite being this veteran squad that had so much championship experience, was literally coming off a championship the year before. I don't know what really happened there. I don't really know what's happening now with Phoenix. We'll see if they can figure out by the time the playoffs roll around, but for the moment, it is definitely something to keep an eye on. I appreciate y'all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Let me know what you think the reason is for these Phoenix Suns fourth quarter woes, and if you think they can figure it out going into the playoffs, or is it even something to really be concerned about? Is it just a weird regular season quirk, and by the time the playoffs roll around, you're not actually that concerned? I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.